Hello everyone, it's Dr. Rafael Gutierrez. Welcome to my channel again. And today I'm actually wanted to talk about stories and how we actually can see reality. The truth is there's a lot of stories that are told and a lot of us actually hear them and okay, we take them at face value. And sometimes whether the story happens isn't really as important as what we get out of the story. What I mean by that is this: if we actually take the story of Matsumura and the bull, people can actually talk about how a king wanted to see how well Matsumura fought, and so he put him against the bull, and how he came out and the bull ran away, and everyone thought about how powerful he was that even the bull could see how strong he was. Well, there is a second story to that where it talks about how Matsumura would actually spent a couple of months to get ready. And when he was getting ready, what he did is he went and rung the bell and did something unpleasant to the bull, pretty much talking about classical conditioning. We can actually see how this works in physiology with Pavlov's experiments and all that. But it actually gives us something with the story. If the story happened or not, we really don't know. It could have, but it's not really that important. It's what we actually get from the story. There is another story that I was told by a gentleman when I was in Okinawa, where he said that uh, when he was younger, he had a teacher who had gone to Japan and did full contact fighting. And the way the rules were for full contact fighting, you could punch to the head, but you couldn't, I'm sorry, you could kick to the head, but you couldn't punch to it. So they practiced keeping their hands down to protect their ribs. And he went to Okinawa and challenged someone who was known as a fighter in the Suri district. They met and they decided to have a full contact fight between them with how the Suri district gentleman fought. And this gentleman's teacher told him that he ended up seeing a weird look on the Suri district's man's face. And he woke up later with a couple of his teeth knocked out. The Suri man telling him how sorry he was that he knocked him out like that, but that he thought he was doing something like he had seen in boxing, where would put their face in to try to get them to attack, and he wanted to see what the technique was. And so this gentleman's teacher apparently used that to tell people, look, you can actually test yourself with full contact with all these different things, but you have to be careful because sometimes rules make it so it doesn't match reality. Now, that doesn't mean that if you're doing full contact fighting, Kyokushin style, it doesn't work in reality. What it means is this gentleman's telling a story, trying to give you the idea of you can't just fight the way you actually would fight with rules. There's a lot of different aspects to it. And so sometimes we hear these stories and sometimes we see these tournaments and we try to figure out, okay, what's best? And it depends on the situation. For instance, if you're doing a tournament where you're, let's say, doing judo, in judo you're allowed to throw, you're allowed to go to the ground, and you're allowed to do a lot of different things. And if you're fighting someone who does judo and you eliminate your punches, you've lost. So judo's actually going to show up as the best self-defense in that situation. If you can't do throws and all you can do to the ground, well, then you have wrestling and jiu-jitsu, which they actually deal with mainly in the floor. And so all these different things, they are great for testing your martial arts, but there is this aspect with rules. And even when there's not rules, there are certain rules that happen. For instance, one of the gentlemen who watched this channel mentioned how, well, when he was younger, he, him or his school, or he heard stories of people going to rough bars to fight to check out how their karate worked. Well, these people had certain rules, and the reason I say that is I met a gentleman who lived in Brazil, and he said that there were people who would go to the favelas of Brazil to try their martial arts, and usually they would end up dead. So what I'm saying is, if you went to a rough bar and got in a bar fight, there could be an understanding where, hey, we're going to beat you up, but you're going to leave alive. If you go to an area that they don't follow the same rules, it's not, that whole thing that would actually show you that, oh yes, I can actually fight and survive, has to be thrown out the window. And so it's really hard to actually look at how something works, if something works. If we don't use rules, then we have, well, in many ways, deaths. If you use rules, well, you're not actually looking at these injuries that can cause permanent damage. If you think about it, this is one thing I've mentioned before. If you have someone who's a professional, someone is a lawyer or professor, they're not going to want to go and get in a bar where they can maybe get arrested and put their career at risk. So you have actually a certain group of people who may actually go into that. Now, there are full contact like MMA, and in MMA, you will have rules to make sure certain things don't happen. It's for safety, and it does actually show you what works and what doesn't. But there are things that you're not going to be able to do. So, a lot of times when I actually say stuff like, okay, well, how do we determine? Well, we have to, if you're using data, like I said last time, you actually have to use data. You have to actually see, can we punch harder? Can we kick harder? Can we move better? Are we seeing people do a lot of better things? And when we see that, we can actually start measuring stuff. It doesn't isn't necessarily that, oh, hey, people were better martial artists before because, hey, they went into a bar, uh, got in a bar fight and came out and it's like, yeah, hey, I won, even if they lost a couple teeth. If you think about it, you take that guy and you take him in a place where someone might actually die, they might not actually come out alive. And knowing that, less people would consider doing that. And so when we actually listen to the stories and we actually look at the numbers, we can see a lot of different things that are pretty interesting. For one is, are you willing to risk your life? The second thing that we have to see how great of a martial artist you are. The other thing we can actually look at is, are you willing to get a disease? And what ends up happening is, as you start saying no and no, as you start getting more understanding of what could go wrong, you will remove yourself from these ideas of, well, I'm not, I'm going to go and pick a fight somewhere to see how tough I am. At the same time, yes, that is a way someone could say that their martial art works. And I'm actually going to add another story to this that all of you probably have heard about, and it's Motobu's bar fight. Some of you have heard that of the story of, I think it was a butcher who challenged Motobu to fight while he was out with his friends. And Motobu tells him, hey, you know what? We'll fight, but let's fight outside. So the guy turns around and starts going down the stairs, and Motobu kicks him. The guy falls off the stairs, and that's the end of the fight. And a lot of people will say, well, that's cheating because they didn't have a fair fight. Well, fair fight means that you're actually agreeing to rules. If you're not agreeing to rules, someone can kick you in the back. And that's actually one of the things that can potentially happen. So how can we actually determine if martial artists are better today or yesterday? And in part, one of the problems with this is we have to ask the question, what is a martial art? Now, a lot of people will say, oh, uh, it's a sport, it's a dance, it's a martial way, it's a philosophy. And I can actually say the more I study and the more I look, the less likely I can argue with any of these definitions. The reason is this: if we take the word martial arts, the words martial arts, and we go to see what they mean, martial means fight or military, art is an application of techniques. So, what is a martial art really depends on what you define as a fight or military application of techniques. If you think about it, there are certain things that you could consider martial arts that other people wouldn't. So what I mean by that is this: if we take modern times, you have military parades. You have actually people in military who take their gun and twirl and do a lot of really neat tricks with them. I assume they're not loaded, but they do these tricks. And someone may say, well, yes, but it's not a military art. And yet it's taught in the military. It's actually part of some groups' military training. So that would technically fall under a martial art. And if people are better at that than they were before, then that would mean that the people who actually train in that type of martial art, I'm using that martial art as a art, are better at martial art in that sense than someone who was before. If they were better before at doing that, again, they would be better at that martial art too. If you're dealing with philosophy, again, it's one of those things where if you're saying that your martial art should be based on a peaceful philosophy, well, there were martial arts that actually are trying to bring a sense of normality to your brain. They're trying to get you to deal with life as it is and not necessarily go out and learn to fight. If that's actually the definition of that martial art, and people are learning a lot more about philosophy, a lot more about how to keep the brain healthy, well, as the information progresses, that one will get better with, as time goes on. And so the definition actually is kind of odd because martial arts, while everyone wants to say, oh, it's this or it's that, it really tends to be something relatively individualized. So, for what I mean by that is this: you have some theatrical martial arts. There's nothing wrong with a theatrical martial art. It's the way they practice that martial art. And if they're getting better at doing theatrical martial arts, then the martial artists are getting better. I hope this makes a little bit of sense and why I actually tell people, look, when you're actually dealing with is our martial artists getting better, you have to actually look at the numbers and the visual evidence. And not just to take these stories and think, oh, well, back in the day, people did this, and that's why they were great martial artists. There's so many different areas of martial arts that people can take, so many different ways in martial arts that you can actually look at it, that to say, oh, well, we were better because of ABC, or we're not as good because we're no longer doing this, well, what is it that your martial art is really trying to get you to do? I hope you enjoy this. And before I sign off, I do want to let you guys know that I've been thinking of doing a pretty much on different playlists. I've tried to do a little bit of anatomy. I didn't like the way it came out because my videos I felt were too long. And so I am going to break them down a little bit more. The purpose of these isn't just for the anatomy for martial artists, but it's actually, I'm trying to do something where someone who might be taking anatomy or physiology or a health class would be able to use them, but also for it to apply to martial artists. So you could actually be able to learn anatomy and understand a lot of the more clinical aspects of why certain techniques are done a certain way. Chances are I am going to bring in a couple props to show how things actually work with this. And so you may actually even be able to use this to make your own Bubishi model. Uh, and hopefully that will help people understand what we're doing more. Well, I hope you enjoyed us and have a nice day.